Welcome back, folks, to Three Zen. This morning's second story is actually a couple of stories, if you will, compiled into one, provided to me by a couple of very dear friends, Frank and Jim. They both were instructor pilots at Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi in the late 70s and early 80s. Then I met both these guys when they came to Randolph Air Force Base in the 560th. These stories take place in 1978 and 1979. I'd heard them tell these stories a couple times over the years, and they're just kind of hilarious. But at any rate, I was going to tell the story in my own words, but then I thought it'd probably be best if you heard it in their voices, if you will. So these stories both include four-ship sorties, missions, and they both were flown on the date of Elvis's passing. And they both were entitled A Tribute to the King. In essence, they were off-the-books sorties. So I'm going to begin with Frank's input here, and then I'll move on to Jim's. So Frank calls his A Tribute to the King 1. Elvis died on August 16, 1977. I had started pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base in September 1977. My class was completing formation checks, which was followed by four-ship training sorties as the first anniversary of Elvis's death approached. After I sewed in my four-ship, my IP, the flight scheduler, told me that, along with three of my classmates, my next four-ship sortie was being delayed for a week or so due to a special sortie. Graceland, Elvis's Memphis home and burial site, now a museum, is about 2 miles west of the approach end of Memphis International Runway 18 right, then 17 right, along Elvis Presley Boulevard, which runs parallel to the runway. In 1978, midday traffic at Memphis International was relatively light since the FedEx fleet departed earlier in the morning and normally didn't start returning until evenings. Traffic was light enough that permitted Columbus T-38s to use the Memphis International Airport for instrument training. There was also a high-low MOA, the Pickwicks. Now, an MOA is a military operating area, directly over Memphis, which was utilized by Columbus for formation training. Usually these areas were huge areas because if you have two airplanes operating, you can eat up a lot of airspace in a very short time. And these areas were used primarily for four-ship training. Our flight standardizations officer, the Stanival officer, and another IP flew a coordinated training flight the week prior to the anniversary of Elvis's death to scout out the best approach circling maneuver to use and work out coordination issues. Further coordination via telecon was conducted with Memphis Approach Control and Memphis International Control Tower in the days leading up to the special sortie, including final calls just before brief and step time to the approach control and tower supervisors on duty. At Columbus on August 16, 1978, all the T-38 supervisor flying knew was that another four-ship training sortie was headed up to the Pickwicks MOA. Nothing out of the ordinary. At step time, 4 first lieutenant IPs, that's right, 4 first lieutenant instructor pilots, and 4 second lieutenants signed out their jets and headed for Memphis. The weather was clear and 7 miles plus with light winds at both Columbus and Memphis. Tactical formation turns and rejoins were conducted in the block flight level 250 to 290 en route to the Pickwicks MOA. Upon entering the MOA, aggressive wing work in the block 9000 to flight level 290 was flown. A lead change which put our flight Stanival officer and his student in the lead was accomplished followed by more aggressive tactical formation rejoins and wing work. At the pre-brief fuel state, lead coordinated for descent for the planned approach and circle at Memphis International. After handoff to approach control and some initial vectoring, a different voice asked our leader if we were the coordinated mission. After an affirmative response, the controller replied, coordinating with the tower, and the previous voice vectored us on to final. Upon handoff to the tower controller stated, no aircraft ahead of you on final, cleared to circle west for a right base to runway 17 right. At this point, our leader tapped his helmet and my IP took control of our aircraft as we proceeded inbound at 300 knots in close fingertip formation, passing down the runway at about 100 feet prior to commencing a shallow climb to 500 feet at the departure into the runway, followed by a turn to roll out over Elvis Presley Boulevard headed towards Graceland. The view from the front seat of number 3 was spectacular during all this. Okay, to put this in perspective, a T-38 typically flew an instrument approach single ship, and the approach was typically flown at 155 knots final approach speed. These guys are smoking down final at 300 knots. Then the circling approach is executed at 600 feet above the ground, again single ship. This is a challenging maneuver to perform a circling maneuver with just one airplane alone, less a gaggle of 4 in close formation at 500 feet. So you kind of get some sense of what these guys were doing. At any rate, they completed their circle at 500 feet, as Frank indicates here, lined up and passed over Graceland. After passing over Graceland, we started a climbing turn to the west as our leader reported, hang 10, missed approach. Nothing out of the extraordinary except instead of 1 airplane, there were 4. To which the tower controller responded, when will you be doing that again? Our leader responded, next year, and we were handed off to approach control for our return to Columbus. After an up initial to 1 full stop landing, our typical approach and landing, and taxi back to parking, I recall that when some of the IPs and students from our flight were signing out at the soft desk, the supervisor asked, what are all you guys grinning about? To which one of the IPs responded, great day to fly, sir. After debrief and 4 excellence, it was off to low-level navigation planning class, which would lead to another memorable pilot training sortie. Maybe for another day, who knows. So that was the mission in 1978. Then Jim submitted his take on A Tribute to the King 2 in 1979. His reads as follows. At the time of this story, Air Force Manual 5138, our governing flight manual, if you will, had been reduced to not much more than a pamphlet. If it didn't specifically prohibit something, it was generally understood you could fly it. He says unnamed UPT base in northeast Columbus, or northeast Mississippi. Give me a break, it's Columbus. About 16 August 1979. Coincidentally, the new flight commander's first day on the job. He's talking about some IPs that love to fly a lot. And we always ordered jets on our off half day for flying. Typically, we would fly with the students either in the mornings or the afternoons. Then we'd have a day, the off day or the off part of the day for instructor pilot flying for proficiency or whatever. So this mission's put together on the off half. Everyone was in early, and one of the guys said, today is the 2nd anniversary of Elvis's death. We ought to take a 4-ship on a canned ride to Navy Memphis and then drop into Memphis International. We can get the ILS to runway 27, go missed approach, make a slight right turn, and fly right down Winchester Boulevard and over Graceland. They're coming at it from a little different angle, if you will. Shocking as it may seem, everyone was all in. Sitting string departure, now a string departure on takeoff is 4-second spacing. So you get all these 4 jets on the runway, and then when lead takes off, 4 seconds later 2 rolls, 4 seconds later 3, and so forth. Out to one of the areas and did some aggressive wing work and other warm-up maneuvers. Then it was into Memphis. Sweet talk Memphis Center, direct to Memphis with an en route descent. Lead asked Memphis approach for the ILS low approach, and a discretion turn for a left turn down Winchester, and he cleared us for it. Once they got to the Memphis Tower, they moved into echelon right, checked in with Memphis Tower, and the formation was on a wire. Cleaned up about 1.5 miles on final for some smash, and as we flew by the tower asked them, "Hey, can you guys do this again?" And once again, lead says, "Perhaps next year." What they had done essentially was the same thing they did the year before. They came across down the runway 27, and then circled for a flight over Graceland, and then they returned back to Columbus. Now, on their return, this is a little bit different from the recovery that Frank told me about. Jim said on their return, they were still pretty fired up from the flyby over Graceland. So they lined up in an echelon formation. Echelon is a formation where you have a lead and then 2, 3, and 4. So they're kind of lined up like that. And they flew the approach to the center runway at Columbus, probably a little bit more smash or speed than usual, and a little bit lower than what we normally fly on an approach like that. And as they flew down the runway, they called for a closed pattern for landing. That means you pull up like so, and then roll the airplane, and then bend it around for a final turn to landing on the outside runway. That's exactly what they did. What they didn't realize is the airplane number 1 for takeoff on the center runway was their squadron commander, who was not impressed. Anyway, they came around, landed, and of the 8 instructor pilots, the flight commander and the guy in his back seat were called in for a come to Jesus meeting with the squadron commander, who advised them that the days of the Vietnam War were over and they would start flying accordingly. Oddly enough, that was all that was ever said about it, although Jim went on to tell me that squadron commander had a hard time talking to any of them over the next few weeks, but he eventually got over it. As far as I know, those were the only 2 missions that were ever flown off the books as a tribute to the king. Carolyn and I had just seen Elvis here a couple weeks ago, and I thought to myself, this today, August 15th, is probably a great time to tell this story. So hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to Frank and Jim. Love you guys. And tomorrow we'll take a moment of pause for a 4-ship over Graceland. Thanks a lot.